Good evening, I'm DK Rosner. Welcome back to the TTT News. Now, we've looked at Barataria San Juan and the Moruga Tableland. Time now to see what the numbers tell us about Chaguanas East. Now, we normally start off speaking with political scientist Dr. Winford James, asking his general thoughts on the constituency. But when we last spoke, Dr. James described Chaguanas East as interesting. So good evening, Dr. James, and wondering what makes Chaguanas East interesting heading into this elections.
I think that seat has always been won by the UNC and its forebears. I am not aware that the PNM has ever won that seat, but I'm subject to correction. And because of that solitary fact, that the PNM has never won there, and the PNM needing to win there, I am thinking that is going to be an interesting battle when we start seeing the polls being counted. Yes, I'm going to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Chaguanas East. We do know, of course, what has happened in St. Joseph, Barataria, San Juan, Moruga, Tableland, and so on. That these have exchanged hands over time, but not, as I recall, Chaguanas East.
Well, from what we're seeing, there was one occasion, and this is just after the constituency was broken into Chaguanas East and Chaguanas West. And from what I'm seeing is 2007. So yes. In 2002, when it was just Chaguanas, Manohar Ramsaran won handsomely for the United National Congress by a majority of 58.03%. And then the next year, you have Mustafa Abdul Hamid over Kirk Megu, PNM and UNC respectively.
And that PNM there.
A rather slimmer margin.
Yeah, I'm looking at your figures there now. Yes. Mustafa 42% of the vote, and Kirk 31% of the vote, which is more than a 10-point difference between the two.
But it seems as though Chaguanas East can be almost like a study of contrast. There's commercial activity, a great deal of commercial activity. There's also farming activity, and the powers or the two political parties, the main political parties, they looked at different parts of the constituency for their support. What kind of impact does the ethnic monolith play in a constituency like Chaguanas East? Because there are 32 polling divisions, electorate of 26,330. What does voter turnout say to you? Because nationally, there's an average of about 6, or the voter percentage is
in the 60s
normally. But in the constituency of Chaguanas East, they normally have 70s. So there's 70, 73, 74%.
Yeah. What do your figures say was the turnout in 2010?
2010, we have 74.46%.
You know why? That's because of the People's Partnership that attracted most, if not all, of the small third-party wannabes. So you had the UNC as the major party coming together with COP, with MSJ, TOP in Tobago, and others, and they routed the PNM as a result of the coalition that they formed to fight the election. And so the question that arises is, if in 2010 the UNC won, or the People's Partnership won, I'm seeing some figures up there now. What is it in 2015? Where did they go? They went to the UNC, of course, in the person of Rizal Karim, and the difference between the two is just about 8%. So the UNC won, as you put it, handsomely. but the PNM are not far behind. Now, I don't quite know what the ethnic composition of Chaguanas East is. I rather suspect that there are more Indians than there are Africans. There are more Indos than there are Afros. And once that remains the case, the UNC is likely to win because our staple reasons for voting include, in the first instance, racial identification. That is what gives the various parties a buttress, a basis for saying that they can win elections to form a government. But we need to know a little bit more of what is happening ethnically speaking in Chaguanas East. Yes?
Well, it seems as though, in terms of ethnic composition, the UNC looks a little more to the north and western side, so areas like Cunupia, Jerningham, and Endeavour. PNM apparently looks for more support from southwest and central, so areas such as Enterprise, Homeland Garden,
Right.
and it seems as though Lange Park, depending on how the wind blows, they can support either way. But that kind of leads to the question, though, of, to your experience, what causes larger groupings to vote outside of those ethnic monoliths?
I don't think that happens. I don't think that larger groups vote outside of the normal way that we have been discussing here, except, of course, you have the demographic proof. I think most people vote to support the party whose leadership resembles them more than anybody else. I think that's the case here. And then these parties now rely on two factors in particular. They rely on the fluidity of voters in those constituencies. That is to say, they rely on people moving in and out, hopefully people of their ethnicity or their ethnic kind. And they rely on the swing vote, the undecided voters who will vote on the performance of both the government and the opposition, and who will vote, therefore, on issues. Whereas most people are going to vote on racial identification, racial identity, if you wish. We are talking about the safe seats, not the safe seats, the marginals, who will be given a certain amount of moderation and a certain amount of balance by the undecided voters coming in on the basis of issues in support of one or the other of the main parties that are contesting Chaguanas East. Did we see a report on what is happening in Chaguanas East from HHB and SBS? I don't recall, you know.
I'm not quite sure, but what I can say, though, is that you keep harking to 2010 and looking at the effect of the coalition. So in 2002, for just Chaguanas, there was a 58% majority win by the UNC. In 2010, when
there was... before you get to 10?
No, and I'm just going in, in terms of that coalition, there was a win by 23%. And that is very different to the year before and the year after.
Yeah, because that's an anomaly.
Yes.
I keep saying that that's an anomaly. Because when the opposition forces come together, they unite, they beat the PNM. If you go back and check the record, you'll see that that is the case. But they can hardly beat the PNM on their own.
So with that in mind, though, Dr. James, I'm wondering what kind of impact do you think that Shiraz can have as an independent, because because it shows that there's not this total togetherness in terms of the UNC grouping up. But just before you give your answer, there's a clip that we want to play to that effect. Thanks.
Okay.
It is in one of these agricultural areas that one of the candidates for Chaguanas East is gaining support. Many see the seat as a straight-out battle between the PNM's Clarence Rambarat and the UNC's Vandana Mohit. However, disgruntled farmers whose lots at Das Trace and Egypt Village were bulldozed in 2011 are still upset.
I feel farmers going on the farmer side right now, because farmers is struggling, doing too much of struggling. You understand? And I feel the rightest thing. Well, Brother Chaguanas Khan is going up, I feel like giving him a vote.
And what do you say to that, Dr. James?
Well, of course, you support people who are on your side professionally, who are on your side occupationally. And I must say Shiraz is a likable guy, and he has been knocking at the door for better representation for quite a long time. So his bona fides are very clear. But you can't make a judgment on the basis of an interview with one person or even 10 persons. That is not going to be enough. But there's some kind of disaffection. The question is whether the disaffection will translate into support of either the PNM or the UNC. I don't think so. And I want to say this as well. Third parties have been faring rather badly in most of the elections we have had in this country. While one must applaud Shiraz for the optimism that he is displaying and the strength actually to get into the fray where there are big fish, or there are big fighters in that fray, right? While we must applaud him, let's be real and say that based on the results of past elections, independent candidates, by and large, more than by and large, the majority of them failed to make a dent in the outcomes of the seats there, or voting in those seats. And I believe the same thing will happen in Chaguanas East. I don't think he will make any kind of dent at all.
All right, well, we continue this conversation with Dr. Winford James. We're looking at the marginal seat of Chaguanas East. Stay with us. We return after this. Welcome back. The race is on. We are speaking with Dr. Winford James about the marginal constituency of Chaguanas East. Now, we previously touched on the topic of creating new constituencies. And just before we continue the conversation, Dr. James, the EBC's website at www.ebctt.com says that delimitation of electoral districts or constituencies is influenced by the growth and the shifts in the population, and it is conducted in accordance with Section 72 and the second schedule of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and this is in the case of parliamentary elections. So we just wanted to give that nugget in addition with the conversation that we are having. Now,
and we have highly qualified commissioners who make the judgment, who use their discretion in interpretation and action. So yes, and the people who are elected to the EBC board are highly qualified people.
And I remember when last we spoke, you also said that they would be doing it along lines that were very far from being politically motivated, and they were trained to do.
We must believe them. We must believe them, DK.
This is true. Hope is the last thing to go as well. But in terms of looking at the significance of immediate past records, now you spoke a little bit about that and looking at people who are walking the talk. So we just spoke about Shiraz Khan, and you can see his sincerity, you can see his consistency with regard to the things that he has been advocating for. But
yes,
Vandana Mohit would have represented Chaguanas as the mayor, and in the particular constituency, I believe also in local government. Now, there, on the same footing, her opponent, Clarence Rambarat. Many people, well, there are people who have been interviewed who have said that they're voting for the United National Congress, but they have had positive things to say about the work of the Agriculture Minister, even to the point of seeing fresh produce from Namdevco being distributed after it was suggested. And this would be to complement food cards. How does that play into the election that we're looking at?
Individuals hardly matter, except they are people of the caliber of Dr. Williams and A.N.R. Robinson and so on. And of course, people are going to support their leader. In the case of the UNC, Kamala Bissessar. In the case of the PNM, Dr. Rowley. But people don't vote essentially on the basis of who the person, the candidate is. They vote on the party because they are thinking of having a certain coherence in the way or others are expressing their vote. They don't want their vote to be wasted because they realize the power of the party is much greater than the power of the individual, of course, as I said, with certain exceptions. So Clarence Rambarat will get some votes because of who he is, but his party will get far more votes than he is able to garner. And the same thing goes for Shiraz. Individuals don't have the kind of appeal that would raise enough votes to give them the edge in the marginals. I don't think. We haven't had that in the past. It could happen now, but I doubt it. People are going to ask themselves, who is going to be the better management of the place, the better management of the economy, the better management of the turnaround that everybody sees is required. And they're not going to be thinking of individual candidates. They're going to be thinking of the party and the credibility of the party. In this case, obviously, Clarence Rambarat brings a great deal of credibility to the PNM, and former Mayor Mohit does the same for the UNC. But those are not sufficient planks on which to say that Chaguanas East will go one way or the other.
What if we're looking, as opposed to looking at the person, we're looking at the party, and we're wondering whether or not PNM has been playing a bit of a long game, and throwing the factor of the Agriculture Ministry being moved from Port of Spain, and it is now in Chaguanas, but not just Chaguanas, but Chaguanas East.
Right.
And then we have the Agriculture Minister being moved from the party that he was, or moved from the constituency rather, that he was trying to represent in elected politics.
Right.
And he is now vying for the same constituency that you have the Agriculture Ministry head office being located in now.
So it was a long-term strategy, quite evidently. But you know, we've got to be a little more, shall we say, pragmatic, and ask ourselves if those who want to identify with their party, who understand that the challenge is for party and not for individuals, will in fact go the way of Clarence Rambarat. Would the Indos, he's an Indo himself, give their support to him over the UNC? I would say I doubt it. I really do. People, as I said, there's a certain ethnic balance in marginal seats that we have to pay attention to. And people are aware of it. The people who will vote Clarence Rambarat as an individual, will be people who are sitting on the fence, who are the swing voters, who will vote on the issue, who would congratulate Mr. Rambarat for moving the headquarters there. But the question is whether their votes are going to be sufficient. I don't know the numbers of the undecided who would vote on that issue. I imagine Clarence would get some of those votes, right? But the vast majority of votes will be coming in on the basis of racial identification, I'm afraid. So Clarence will have to win the vast majority of the undecided vote in Chaguanas East. Can he do so? I don't know. I allow that as a probability.
In 2007, when Mustafa Abdul Hamid won the constituency of Chaguanas East, People,
2007, right?
yes, 2007. People would have voted for him. He was actually walking or campaigning with, he was cited campaigning with Clarence Rambarat.
Right.
Does that have any impact? Because we've spoken about people who have won constituencies before saying, okay, well, yes, they support this person, but not necessarily physically being there with that person, lending their support, saying, you voted for me in 2007, I want you to vote for this candidate in 2020.
Yeah.
Does that carry over?
It does, but we have to ask ourselves to what degree. This is a constituency where there's obviously a fluidity of voters. People move back and forth, right? The numbers keep shifting, but not insufficient, not to the extent of creating a safe seat. Chaguanas East is not a safe seat for everybody. It's been changing hands. Leave out 2010 as an anomalous year and focus on 2002, 2007, 2015. And you see a certain changing of ownership, so to speak, political ownership. But the numbers are small, not enough to guarantee that one candidate will keep being voted election after election. So if that is the case, we must ask ourselves, why are we having that shift? And I must go back to my thesis that we have fluidity of the votes. We have that movement there. We also have a sizable portion of the electorate, the undecided, who are not voting on racial identification, but rather on the issues. And if they think that PNM and Clarence Rambarat as its most important frontline agent, then the seat will go to the PNM. But these are things that we can't work out beforehand. We can only speak of probability as we have been informed by the history of voting in the particular constituency.
Looking down the road, if we wanted to say, well, eventually, at some point in time, Chaguanas East would become a safe seat, what are some of the things that would have to happen?
Yes, you've got to pack Chaguanas East. Within those, in the case of the UNC wanting to make it a safe seat, and I don't know how the UNC can do that. And the same thing for PNM, pack the place with Afros. Now, how do you pack a place ethnically? You got to have attractions, right, that influence people to move from where they are now into the targeted place. And I don't know that I am not sufficient informed about the improvements in Chaguanas East to say that those improvements would be attracting Afros and Indos in the numbers required to establish the thing as a safe seat. Right. So, and that is the main thing, causing people to migrate from one area to the next, insufficient numbers, but along ethnic lines. I don't know that that move is happening and is being observed. Certainly it has not been reported on.
No, we never have enough time for these conversations, but at the same time, I think sometimes it's better to whet the appetite and then have the discussion take place at another time. But what it seems, though, is that people still think they can make a difference because we see these relatively high voter turnouts. But we want to thank you for turning out, Dr. James, and for us to have these conversations on these marginal seats. And on behalf of our entire news team, thank you for joining us. Good night. I'm DK Ronstar.